these pianos are loaded up basically with the full General MIDI 2 sound bank in addition to several dozen core tones. Now, Yamaha doesn't call them General MIDI sounds. They've got their own sort of version of the General MIDI sound bank, which they call, I think, XG tones, and there's about 400 in there. Roland's got about 300 or so of the General MIDI 2 sound bank that you can access. So it's a fairly similar offering. Really, you're going to wind up spending a lot of your time more on the core tones, and so we've already heard a good selection of the acoustics. Let's now just hear a couple of the electrics, a couple of the organs, a couple of the pads, just to give you a sense of the range of both of these instruments. So here's your 1976 Suitcase Grand, or Suitcase Rhodes. P Light, modified. And that's the full range. So there's 18 E-pianos, core 18 piano tones, E-piano tones on the FP60X. And every single one of those is unique and super usable and fun. It's always what's impressed me about the selection on there. Let's go through the same sort of options on the P515. to my ear, a fairly distinct difference between these two when it comes to E-piano selection. So there's 7 versus 18. And there were definitely some on the P515 that were really nice and lush, and Yamaha, of course, has been known for decades for kind of that rich, super complex DX tone, and I love those patches on the Yamaha. Some of the Rhodes, to me, lacked a bit of character. They were sort of flat and weren't quite as dynamic as what I would like if that was going to be sort of my go-to piano, playing some of those R&B gigs, or even just singer keyboard gigs, and they want some of that 70s, 80s sounds. The range and just the richness of a lot of those patches on the Roland, to me, it really stands out in contrast to the P515 in that particular category. Let's now also have a look at organ, because that's another patch that gets used pretty frequently, not as frequently, but pretty frequently if you're playing in a band and you're doing some of those funk or soul tunes. Sometimes, organ or even rock, organ is a called for sound. So here's jazz organ slow. So I think there is, about 6 on there when we get over to the Roland. The electric organs. So 18 versus 6, kind of a similar reaction to the organ selection between these two. You've got a much bigger range. You're covering some like tone wheel stuff. You're getting into the electric as well as the pipe, and just a little more selection. And I always find that on some of these kind of mid-tier models, which we're talking about here, these aren't like top stage pianos or workstations, the tone wheel organ stuff is really hard to nail. And I'm not like super blown away by either one of these models when it comes to those sounds. I wouldn't find myself gravitating to some of those core tones, because they both sound kind of cheesy. But when you get a little deeper into the selection, some of those mellow bars, the gospel spin on the Roland, I found to be pretty useful. I really liked a couple of the pipe organ sounds on the Yamaha. I wouldn't say either one of them knocks it out of the park, but if you are going to be using organ sounds and it's between these two, I think the Roland is going to give you a little bit more depth and maybe slightly more authenticity in terms of nailing a broader range of those needs. Both have a pretty good selection of strings on them. Both have a pretty good selection of bass sounds. Where the Roland, again, I think just has a little more depth to it is on the synth side. If you're going to be going and needing some sort of synth, like brassy synth jabs or sounds, or some of the lead sounds, you're going to get that on the Roland. Now, what feels a little mismatched is, you know, usually when you'd be getting into some of that synth stuff, you'd have some ability to have some expression on there, either with, you know, with a joystick or some sort of a mod wheel. There isn't any of that on the FP60X, so I probably wouldn't wind up really making that much use out of it. So there's a roundup of some of the sound options that you get on these two.